Welcome, future teachers. Let's get right into it. Today's explainer is all about transforming those super dense theories from your LET professional education review into a highly structured, strategic battle plan. Look, if you've been feeling totally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of philosophies, laws, and psychological frameworks you got to memorize, trust me, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're not just mindlessly memorizing abstract concepts. We are sharpening your critical thinking so you can spot the exact keywords and totally dodge those traps hidden in your board exam.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The core educational philosophies. 2. Society, systems, and learning. 3. Psychology in the classroom. 4. Law, ethics, and logic. And finally, 5. Conquering those tricky board exam traps.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, the core educational philosophies and foundational theories. Our source material sets up a really interesting battle right out of the gate: idealism versus realism. So idealism, championed by heavyweights like Plato, focuses entirely on the mind and intrinsic spiritual values. It's all about pulling out latent ideas using the Socratic method. It's exactly why we study heroes like Jose Rizal, right? To inculcate those deep spiritual values. But right across the ring from it is realism. Realism prioritizes the physical, objective world, the stuff that exists independently of us. In a realist curriculum, you're going to see a massive, organized emphasis on science, math, and the exact physical actualities of life.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how pragmatism actually fuels progressivism. Pragmatism basically says, hey, if an idea works in the real world, then it's true. Progressivism takes that concept and applies it directly to the child. It's super experiential and totally child-centered. Think of it like this. Say teacher Myra realizes her students are absolutely obsessed with billiards. So she brings a pool table into the class to actively capitalize on that interest to teach math. That right there, that is progressivism in action. It's literally learning by doing.
Let's look at another major contrast you'll definitely see. When you get an exam scenario about a parent letting a student freely choose their own college course or a teacher really leaning into personal responsibility, that is classic existentialist freedom. Existentialism is all about subjectivity and the unique individual. And, you guessed it, this totally clashes with essentialism. Essentialism is that strict, back-to-basics approach. It demands disciplined attention, longer school days, and total mastery of core literacy and math skills just to make students socially efficient.
Looking at the text, two major keywords you need to train your brain to spot are perennialism and naturalism. Perennialism points directly to unchanging, classical, universal truths. So if a principal in a test question says humanities and the great books are the most crucial elements of education, boom, that's perennialism. Naturalism, on the flip side, completely denies forced societal constraints. It's heavily influenced by Rousseau, and the idea is to let the child unfold naturally at their own pace. It highly prioritizes physical development and informal learning in a natural setting.
Now pay attention, because these philosophies create a huge conceptual trap, distinguishing between rationalism, empiricism, and behaviorism. Rationalism relies purely on reason, the idea that the mind operates totally independent of the senses. Empiricism argues the exact opposite, saying the absolute source of knowledge is your physical, sense-based experience. And then we have behaviorism, which focuses entirely on environmental conditioning. If you see a question about teacher princess keeping her classroom spotless so students are conditioned not to litter, or maybe using Skinner's reward systems for stimulus response, lock in behaviorism, for sure.
Moving right along to Section 2, Society, Systems, and Learning. Let's look at the broader frameworks.
So, sociologists use these macro-level theories to explain school structures. And here we're contrasting Emile Durkheim's functionalist view against Karl Marx's conflict theory. Functionalism sees society in perfect equilibrium. In this view, schools exist simply to create moral harmony, shared values, and social cohesion. Conflict theory, however, takes a much darker view. It sees schools as arenas of power and tension. It assumes society is held together by competing interests and inevitable class struggle, suggesting that schools can actually perpetuate complex hierarchies rather than solve them.
Now, if you want to actively change that society, you use Reconstructionism. The whole goal here is to awaken critical consciousness to solve pressing socioeconomic problems and ultimately create a completely new social order. You really want to remember Paulo Freire here. He violently opposed the passive, what he called banking system of learning, where students are just treated like empty vessels waiting to be filled.
Instead, he demanded that we use education actively as a tool to solve real-world community problems. Taking this to a global scale, we have to look at UNESCO's 4 pillars of learning. We have learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. But here is the trick. Note that UNESCO places the absolute heaviest emphasis on learning to live together. On your exam, remember this specific pillar is viewed as the vital, essential path to global peace, empathy, and mutual understanding.
Okay, let's zoom in a bit for Section 3, Psychology in the Classroom. We're talking student behavior now.
The source material highlights 4 heavy-hitting theorists you absolutely must anchor in your mind. First, Freud is your go-to for instinct, the id, versus your conscience, the superego. Then there's Erikson, who maps out those psychosocial stages like trust versus mistrust. Pavlov and Skinner, well, they are your absolute masters of conditioning and reinforcement. And finally, Bandura. He is crucial for social learning theory. This is that moment when students learn something by simply observing you model a behavior right there on the board. When we apply these theories to cognitive development, we get some very distinct milestones. For instance, if a board question asks why you should use visual charts or diagrams, well, that's Jerome Bruner's iconic stage of development. If a child calls every single unfamiliar animal a dog, that's Jean Piaget's concept of assimilation. They're fitting new information into their existing cognitive structures. And if the question asks how young kids naturally learn grammar without any formal teaching at all, that points directly to Noam Chomsky's theory of innate language capacity.
Guys, please don't confuse these 2 psychological traps on exam day. The Pygmalion effect is when your high belief and expectations actually drive a student to excel. It becomes this amazing self-fulfilling prophecy. The Hawthorne effect, though, entirely different thing. That's when someone alters their behavior simply because they know you are watching them. Trust me, quickly recognizing the difference between these 2 will save you some absolutely crucial points.
All right, on to Section 4, Law, Ethics, and Logic. These are the strict rules of our profession. Looking at our historical and legal foundation, this timeline outlines the specific historical shifts you definitely need to know. Back during the Spanish period, the media of instruction were Spanish and the vernacular. Jump forward to the mid-1980s, and that era was defined by intense, heated debates on values education. And that leads right up to our modern era, which is characterized by the implementation of a fully integrated basic education curriculum.
As teachers, we also have to be perfectly logical. Aristotle gave us the science of logic, and for the exam, you must perfectly distinguish between deductive and inductive reasoning. So, deductive logic means moving from a broad, general principle down to a specific, true conclusion. Inductive logic is the exact opposite. You start from specific individual observations and use those to build all the way up to a broad, generalized conclusion. And knowing that framework perfectly prepares you for those tricky scenario questions where you have to spot logical fallacies. For example, if an exam scenario shows a teacher threatening a failing grade just because a student disagrees with them politically, you are looking directly at the ad baculum, or the appeal to force fallacy. Ad misericordiam is an appeal to pity, ad populum is an appeal to highly charged emotion, and ad hominem, well, that's entirely rejecting an argument just by attacking the person's character instead of their ideas.
Let's talk law and ethics really quickly. Legally, the 1987 Philippine Constitution demands that the state assign the absolute highest budgetary priority to education, no exceptions. And ethically, our code of ethics is absolutely ironclad. It strictly forbids us from ever accepting gifts from learners or parents in exchange for favors or concessions. And it absolutely outlaws inflicting corporal punishment or making any deductions from a student's scholastic ratings for non-academic acts. Finally, we arrive at Section 5. Conquering board exam traps. Let's run through some scenario drills. Let's put all this into practice with a terrifying, real-world ethical trap. Imagine your exam asks this. Teacher Nancy receives a death threat ordering her to pass an undeserving student. What advice would a utilitarian give her? Do they tell her to fail the student to uphold pure justice? Or do they tell her to pass the student?
Believe it or not, the correct answer for a utilitarian is to actually pass the student. Crazy, right? But here's why. Utilitarianism focuses entirely on the greatest total happiness and maximizing utility for the maximum number of people. Passing the student avoids physical harm to the teacher, and it brings utility to the student and their family. It's the right choice under that specific philosophy, even if it completely and totally clashes with our pure principles of justice and fairness.
As you eventually step into that testing center, I want you to remember this powerful existentialist truth.
You are what you choose to be. Your success on this exam is not up to chance. It is a matter of your personal choice, your unique effort, and your absolute responsibility. We've mapped out the philosophies, the psychologies, and the laws today. So, the final question I leave you with is this: what focused, intentional action are you going to take today to claim your title as a licensed professional teacher? You've got this.